Yeah, that's the good stuff right here. Hard, soft literature. Yeah. I mean, sort of, kind of. I tell you what, I think I'll check it out. You know, I'm not normally one to destroy books, but I'm just kind of big for it.
Hi, folks, Fruit and Doggy here to do another book discussion, and today I'm covering The Reluctant Swordsman by Dave Duncan. It was published in 1988 and is just over 325 pages. It is a science fiction book. Well, much more of a fantasy book. And I'm just going to read the summary of the story real fast. Pawn of the Goddess. The last thing Wally Smith remembered was a fog of hospitals, grim-faced doctors, and pain. So when he woke in the body of a barbarian swordsman, attended by a beautiful slave girl and a wizened old priest nattering about the goddess, he assumed it was a fever dream. But the world could not be dismissed so lightly. A naked little demigod called Shorty explained that the goddess needed a swordsman. If Wally undertook the job and succeeded, all that the world had to offer would be his. If he refused, the results would be unpleasant. Wally was not convinced, but Shorty was exquisitely persuasive. Soon Wally found himself carrying a magnificent sword with no idea how to use it, and the servants of the goddess were out to stop him. Excuse me. Overall, I would say that this was an interesting book. And to go off of the summary, basically what happens is not exactly a parallel world situation, but somebody from our world is dying, and on their dying breaths, their spirit essentially inhabits the body of another man in another world, who in this world, they are basically a lord. They are a very prominent, high level swordsman, and because of his rank, he essentially is able to do as he pleases in that world. It is a very primitive world, it'd be somewhat of an old world order. Seems that it has a very strict caste system. For instance, if you're born a slave, you'll always be a slave. The people there aren't literate, or at least the vast majority aren't. They have a strong oral tradition, and actually, what's funny about that is research has shown that people who aren't literate and tell stories, they have exquisite memories because everything that they need to know has to be memorized. It has to be up here, and so their memories are much stronger than people who are able to read. But then people who can read don't have to memorize everything. If it's written down somewhere, if they can simply remember where the information is, and they're able to reference it as necessary. But anyways, he struggles at first dealing with this world, partly because he doesn't think it's real, and then also because it's such a culture shock, not only because of the vast change as far as culture and sort of a technology gap, but more of kind of human conditions where there's more poverty, more human suffering, more want, in essence. And then contrasting that, which truthfully in our world, there's a pretty big gap between the haves and the have-nots. But when he receives the benefits of his position, he is surrounded by wealth and excess. And basically, what happens in the story is that Wally has to adapt to this new environment, and it takes him a while to wrestle with his experiences, his expectations, those of the people who are native to this area, and then also the idea that not that he's a swordsman, that he has this very strict code of ethics, sort of a chivalrous system made up of hundreds of essentially mantras to live by. And the fact, on top of that, he's also, as a swordsman, he's going to fight people to the death. He's going to wind up killing people. That is simply the expectation. And what I find somewhat odd about the story, though, is the mention of the demigod. Seemingly, in the story's lore, what is actually taking place, there's at least a handful, I don't know how many, deities, demigods, who are essentially these immortal beings who have lived incredibly long lives, hyper intelligent, all powerful, yet I don't know if they're necessarily constrained or restricted, but they don't just snap their fingers and make things happen. They purposely inhibit themselves from going too heavy handed, I suppose. And so, as he interacts with Wally, he does grant him a few boons, but he doesn't. And I mean, they're frankly quite spectacular for the environment he's in. A sword that is a marvel for that time, exquisitely balanced and designed. A simple hoard of gemstones that would be worth, again, a small, a fortune. And so on the one hand, this demigod is pouring out for him many blessings that for that time in that world are quite extravagant, but on the other, he's also not giving him a jetpack. He's not giving him amazing magical items and technological marvels that would, based on how the demigod interacts with him, he's aware of multiple worlds multiple times, and so in theory he could access a wide plethora of items that would be marvels for that world, but would just be commonplace in another one, and could basically stack the deck in his favor. It's sort of a weird, like a meta experience where this demigod is, for whatever reason, interactive, willing to talk with him, answer his questions to an extent, but unwilling to give him everything. But if he plays along and he does his part, then he's to be greatly rewarded. It's sort of a strange balance. And I think that is a slight issue with using such powerful figures, reality bending entities in your work, is that it completely unbalances everything. But I'm getting a little bit specific in those areas. I did like the way that the story depicts him, because I think it does a decent job of a fish out of water story. He seems reasonably perturbed and angered at things that are shocking to him. The way that slaves are treated, the way that they are denied their dignity, but that's because that's their expectation, because that's the life they know, and all that they can ever hope for. It's just commonplace for them. They've made peace already, or else they would have gone mad and died of despair already. And that's just not the human condition. No matter what your lot no matter what your lot in life is, you tend to have a survival instinct. That's just kind of a human nature thing. I'm trying to think. One aspect of the story that I think was quite hamstrung was the story takes place almost exclusively in one area. And it's all because of a decision Wally makes early on after he accepts the situation he's in. He chooses not to strike down somebody who had somewhat questionable ethics, and because of that, he gets into this long, drawn out kind of a strategic battle of the wits where he basically becomes a prisoner in a excuse me, kind of a large temple, unable to leave because he'll be ambushed or attacked. And it kind of drags on with this concept too far. I mean, it's not a bad start to, I don't know how many books are in the series. I'm not sure if the rest of the books, if they kind of uh, maintained a reasonable status quo as far as quality, if they peaked or dipped. But it really was unfortunate that he was unable to make any progress on his quest. He was unable to venture beyond this starting point because he locked himself down in this one place. So that is a real disadvantage to the story. It's unfortunate that it stays in that one setting so long, and it kind of stalls or delays not just quest progression but story progression. It feels a bit stagnant, and I think that's a shame, especially because I thought that the book described the action scenes, the sword fights, the duels. I thought they were reasonable. I'm not going to presume that I fully understood clearly exactly what was being described, but I could visualize, I think, reasonably well what a good sword fight between two people could have played out like. So I did enjoy the book. I thought it was fun and pleasant, not too heavy with like a. It would have been easy to be very condescending or to get too. Can't think of the right word. To be very. Oh, what's the word? It's where you're too preachy. It would have been very easy for the book to have been too preachy, to have this 21st century individual, or I guess 20th century, time the book was written, wax poetically about the ills of the past and slavery, and just looking down at other societies. I think it balances it reasonably well. That's one of the things he has to deal with, is that he has to come to terms with society as it is now, how that world operates. And even though there would be some things he'd want to change, I would definitely want to change things, of course. I don't want people to be born into slavery. But, it's going to take a long time. That world needs time to develop, to grow, to mature before it can just make all the drastic changes that he would want to see. Excuse me. But anyways, I thought I will mention as well that Wally, the main character, has a few. He encounters some allies and a support group that I think balances him out pretty well. People who are, excuse me, kind of a nice blend. You have people who are a little bit more simple-minded, a little bit more base. Others who are more strategic and cunning. They're all a little bit clever in their own ways, but I think it works. I think it's a good blend. And I also like that little conveniences, little not starstruck. Things that could easily be dismissed as coincidences are explained as actions taken by the divine, that was intentional. Nothing's quite by accident. Considering what the assumed reality is for the story, that's very fitting. That's very appropriate. That yes, he wasn't haphazardly chosen. that there was a purpose for him being picked, that the circumstances as he first arrives and deals with situations, the people he encounters, and the very specific details about that, it's all intentional. That was set up on purpose. Not quite fate, but again, a little bit of fate cheating because the divine intervention. But that was my take on the book. I don't know if I'd recommend buying it because I don't know anything further about the series, but I think it's worth a read. I enjoyed it. And I suppose that's going to be all. But anyways, folks, I'll see you around later. Hope you enjoyed. And as always, fruit and doggy.
Yes, there really is nothing quite like curling up with a fine piece of literature, if you know what I mean.